Welcome. Please take a seat. We're going to get started. We have a big audience also online with us. This is going to be simulcast the same time we do it live. So thank you, everybody. Welcome to Compass. Can I move this a little bit, Caleb? Move it over. Okay. All right. Thank you. My name is Guy Lehman. I'm an owner and advisor here at Compass, and today's talk is Retiramentality, the new retirement. Thank you for coming to Compass. Just to introduce everybody, again, my name is Guy Lehman. Kurt Pearson, we're going to have him talk just a little bit. And in the back, we have Justin Van Houten, one of our advisors, Michelle Bjorkren, Alan Holstein, Steve Connard, and we have, oh, no, not you. Cheryl, please raise your hand. Hannah, Joe in the back, and Nancy. Caleb, raise your hand. He makes everything go with technology, so thank you. So welcome to Compass. Thank you for coming today. We're going to talk about the softer side of retirement today. What to do, how to explore those things, and a lot of great data. Now, Kurt Pearson, our fearless leader, is going to talk to us a little bit about what he's starting to understand about his journey into retirement.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to move from a spectator for all those years, 33 years of helping people in the transition toward retirement, to now becoming a participant, right? I'd say I'm probably about 2/3 of the way on my glide path towards an eventual day that I don't need to be here. And so my path has been very, very long and kind of drawn out. Some of you have targeted a final day or a specific time frame. The thing that I've been learning about the process as a participant is that it's one of those life transitions that can get a little confusing and a little bit make you feel a little bit insecure at times. And where I've gone actually in many of those times is back to the two questions that we ask here at Compass regularly to our team members and to ourselves. The two questions are, who am I and what am I called to create? We happen to believe that we're all kind of artists, and that creating doesn't stop when we stop our job or stop our career, right? And so as we keep creating in retirement, what does that look like? And what are we called to create? Now, there's some vocabulary in your packets. One of the vocabulary items or words is vocation. Comes from the Latin word voice, or to call. And we believe that voice is down inside of us. And so a lot of the material that our speaker is going to cover today will really hopefully help you uncover a little bit more about who you are, and a little bit more of how you look to reinvent yourself in the stage of life. And if you ever want to have a conversation about it over a cup of coffee or something a little stronger, let me know. I have a little bit more margin in my schedule these days, and I enjoy those conversations for sure. So coming from Ankeny, Chris, who's with Invesco, wants to kind of lead us through some of these materials. Tons of materials on your table. I found them to be very beneficial and helpful down through the years. Some of this material is a reiteration of something that we used 20, 25 years ago to initiate retirement conversations. So without any further ado, Chris, come help us out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And heck, that's about as good of an introduction as I could ask for from being timely. Can you all hear me okay? I mic'd up. I normally just talk loud, mostly because I'm yelling at my children, but that's a whole different thing here in general. Let me make sure that this is going here. Caleb, can we flip over to the PowerPoint? There we go. All right, excellent. So my name is Chris Wine, and I'm with Invesco. Have any of you guys heard Invesco before? If you haven't, just watch the NCAAs the next 2 weeks, because there's enough QQQ commercials to drive you nuts. A whole story about that I'm happy to tell you at some point. But Invesco is an asset manager. We're one of the 5 or 6 biggest asset managers in the world. run $1 trillion something dollars, you know, how all those numbers start to blend together. And, you know, we really do try to do our best at running clients' money in whatever wrapper it could be. It could be mutual funds, it could be ETFs, it could be individual investments. And that certainly is a big part of our purpose. But a lot of it also, once we start to talk about how to get the money to work, is what are we going to do with the money? And that's what this presentation, The New Retirementality, is all about, is to start to think about, or to put some of those thoughts in paper, you know, beyond just what's your number, like those commercials will say, and say, what are we actually going to do with this? And to the points that was just brought up, in the last 5 or 6 years, this really has kind of come home to us in our house. Both my wife and I have parents that are in their 70s. They've both hit those retirement ages. But guess what? Nobody really retired, right? I mean, they still own the farm that my mother-in-law still teaches. My dad was an attorney for many, many years. He's moved down to Florida, and he's actually threatening to take the bar in Florida. I don't think he's going to do it, because he was miserable, he told me, for the last 45 years. And ever since, well, that was my fault. That had nothing to do with working. But no. But now this conversation kind of goes on. And, you know, what we've seen is that retirement is not the way that it was for our parents, and wasn't the way that it was for our grandparents. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first, this idea of like a pension, you know, is kind of in the rear view mirror, right? We don't have a check that's the same as the day that we go into retirement. But people also have a very different view as to what retirement looks like. So that sets the stage a little bit for what we'll talk about for the next 3 hours. The first, like 40 minutes or so, if that's okay with you guys. The first is this idea of what retirement meant, what it historically has meant in the past. Then we're going to talk about what we mean when we talk about the new retirementality, which was some research we did with an author, Mitch Anthony. And we've continued to refresh over the course of the last 15 or 20 years to identify what the most successful retirees and pre-retirees had in common, both from a planning perspective and then what they do in retirement, and share some of those findings. And then finally, to really tie that up with the critical 3 questions, the 3 things that we want to make sure that we identify and have a conversation about, either internally with our spouse or with our partner ahead of time, to make this retirement a lot more successful. So I'm going to do my fun little history lesson here for just a second and talk a little bit about what retirement meant, or what retire meant. So let me ask a question of everybody in this room. If I say the term traditional retirement, we do like a word association. What are some of the first things that jump to mind? 6. Okay, that's my second question. So perfect. Thank you. Anything else? Done with work. Blue light special. Rocking chair. I mean, you start to think about these terminology. You turn it off. What'd you say? Old. Okay. Those are that ideas of what like traditional retirement had meant in the past. And this was the image, right? The day that we walk out of work, they give us a gold watch. Now, look, I look around this room. There's a heck of a lot more smart watches than there used to be gold watches once upon a time. And you could also kind of make the argument that the gold watch itself is a little bit depressing. You know, what does it represent? How many hours you've given to your employer over the course of the last 30 or 40 years? Is it a countdown for how many hours we have left in retirement? You know, we think that this gold watch really is antiquated and it's outdated. A much better imagery would be something like this, which is a compass, because the day that we stop doing the job or the career that we've been doing isn't the day that everything stops, right? That we just stop work completely. It's an opportunity or ability for us to take a next direction. So this is one of my favorite mustaches of all time. Anybody know who this is? Otto von Bismarck, exactly. Otto von Bismarck was from Prussia. He came together to create the unification of Germany and was the first chancellor of the German Empire, I think starting in the 1870s until 1890. The reason that we show Otto von Bismarck here is he is actually fundamental to that second number that you gave me of 65 when it comes to retirement. So Otto had a big job, right? I mean, these European countries, if we go back 150 years, were very spread out. They were all these little, you had Prussia, you had Bavaria, you had, wherever all the angry Germans were. And they had to kind of create this as one group to bring it together. And they had a parliament. But not everybody agreed with what Otto von Bismarck wanted to do. He had relatively progressive strategies. And he looked around the room and he saw that most of the people who were opposing him were older, right? It wasn't the younger generation. And if he tried to figure out exactly where that age came out to be, you want to guess about what the age was of people who were against him? It was 65 years old. So he tried to say, how can we rethink this parliament and to be able to create a system that I can work more effectively with? And one way is to give old people money. So he came up with the first pension program for the German government and tried to force some of his detractors away. It was successful. Like I said, he became chancellor. Now, the next kind of iteration of that builds upon the number 65 happened at the very beginning of the 19th century, and it was American Express. Very successful company, was looking to try to have more benefits for their employees, and they came up with the first United States pension. Now, it was the first. So nobody had done it before. So they had to look around and figure out who has kind of come up with a pension before, come up with this program, and it was Otto von Bismarck. So they said retirement age at American Express is now 65 years old. So we'll fast forward to the next deadline, which was 1935, right? And now we were dealing with an existential crisis here in the United States of the Great Depression. And FDR had, two really big issues. The first was we had transitioned from like an agrarian society, right? Where if you stopped working and stopped being able to contribute, they shifted you off to the bedroom off the kitchen, right? In the farmhouse. And the second was unemployment rates were sky high. Young people, if I remember the number correctly, under 30, so your 20-year-olds in 1935 had an unemployment rate of roughly 25%. So there were two things. First, there weren't enough jobs, right? There wasn't enough jobs yet, but there was also a lot of older people that were, quite frankly, clogging up the workforce. So as FDR came out with the idea of Social Security, he decided that the Social Security retirement age should be 65. Same thing as Otto von Bismarck, same thing as American Express. And it also helped shift some of those kind of, backs out of the workforce, for lack of a better term, and replace them with younger, stronger backs. And again, all these ways that they were trying to address this big need. Now, anybody want to guess what the average life expectancy was in 1935? It was 62. You want to know why Social Security was never going to run out of money? Because your average retirement was -3 years. This system's going to work just fine, right? We fast forward to today, and again, I'm not going to get political here, right? I'm not in a pizza ranch running for president. But we want to talk about what the average retirement is today. It's actually gone down from 65 to 63. And unsurprisingly, the average lifespan has gone up quite a bit. Now, this is the lifespan for somebody who was born 79 years ago. You can actually probably say that the lifespan for somebody in this room who's approaching retirement is quite a bit higher than this. One statistic that we've shared before is that if you have a couple that are 65 today, there's a 50-50 shot one of them is going to live to at least 95 years old. Okay, I mean, that might be frightening, it might be encouraging, but we're starting to talk about a 32-year-long retirement versus a -3-year retirement. And that's why rethinking the idea of pension and this old idea of what retirement meant to this new retirementality is so important. Because again, we have an average retirement of 16, 20, 30 years, depending on how you look at it. And that's where this new retirementality, the genesis of this really was, is to make sure that we can now take this next chapter, which could last a generation, and make it, quite a bit more enjoyable. To stop thinking about retirement as the very end, like you said, right, as the finish line, and as that next step. So we've got this much longer road, and this is the nice, clean, pretty picture that, we pulled off Getty stock images, but this isn't really as easy as it is from the day that you walk out of the office for the first time of retirement, because there's some big questions that start to come up as we figure out what the path is. Each of ours are going to be different. And then we get to these side markers, these stop signs, these yield signs along the road. You can see you've got, the what yield, where you've got questions like, should we join a golf club or move to a new city or buy a lake house or go to college? We've got the green buttons, like, how am I going to deal with Social Security and Medicare and my 401k distributions? The yellow signs like Social Security and early retirement. There is a lot of noise here, but these are all questions that almost every single one of us has to answer, except my wife says, you're not joining a golf club because you're bad at golf. But she's good at golf, so she gets to join the golf club, she says, but that's a whole different story. So we want to try to do is organize these into 3 key categories. The first is about life changes. what is retirement going to look like? The second is, when is it going to happen? How can we identify the date where we've got enough money that we can live comfortably? And then how am I going to get there? And obviously, most people in this room, if you're working with a financial advisor, you're well ahead of this. You've had some of these conversations. Our goal is to bring a little bit more color to that. So let's start with this first idea of what is it going to look like? And we really think that there are three key areas, three key questions that we want to answer. The first is, what is it going to look like? Really comes down to location, is where are we going to do it, right? The second comes down to, as you guys mentioned here at the beginning, is vocation. What are we going to do when we're there? And then vacation is, how are we going to enjoy it? And if we can answer these three questions, where are we, what are we going to do, and how are we going to enjoy it? That's where we think we're going to have a lot more success. So again, location is typically the simplest. You gave a great definition of vocation here, this idea of your purpose, moving forward. And then, of course, vacation doesn't mean necessarily just travel. It could be golf. It could be those things that you find fun. It could be those hobbies in general. So in front of you, we're going to take a moment, and I'm going to get a sip of water. We've got this set of cards, which we call our priority cards. Do you all see them? Do you all have a copy of these? I promise, if they're not opened already, I saw they were doing their best to open them up for you. That's the hardest part of your day today. We'll be getting these things open. But this, and for those of you who are online, I've tried to put some of these on there as well and make this a little bit easier. But we've got 4 images on each of these categories, specifically around location, around vocation, and around your vacation. And what we want to do is answer these questions here in general. First is, what do each of these photos mean to you? So what I'd ask you to do is to take those pictures and kind of prioritize them in each of the 3 categories: vocation, vacation, location, and put the one that resonates the most on top as your first choice. Look, they are all intentionally vague. They all are very much meant to mean different things to everybody. Once you do that, find a partner, maybe the person you came with, maybe the person sitting next to you, or if you're at an odd table, we'll figure something out. We can go kind of 3 people talking, and why those priority pictures popped up. And then finally, if you've got some questions, and we've got a framework here that we'll share at the end around the financial implications. But I'll stop for a moment. If you guys can kind of go through those and find those top pictures in each of those 3 categories, and then maybe we can just encourage just a little bit of conversation. Oh, thanks. Oh, I got it. Thanks. My wife said, "What we just went through false spring, and now we're in the season of despair," or something like that. It's good because pollination season's right around the corner. And while you're doing this, I should have said, we haven't really gotten to too much of this, but a lot of this information, a lot of these slides are in the workbook that's in front of you. So the first couple pages are around those average ages, and then you'll see that most of the rest of the stuff that we reference, you're going to have in front of you as well. So if you want to follow along after this kind of card exercise, we could do well. Everybody pick out their top ones already? So if you're following along at home, or if you want to keep track of this later. The first page will have those vision card clarifications and what those three images are and why you chose. Which one did you choose as the location? I gotta ask, which would you choose as the location? That's always my favorite one. Oh, okay. Oh. All right. Everybody pick out their cards okay? Easy enough? I promise you, we have another one of these that's got like 75 cards. So that is when the 3-hour presentation comes in. But hopefully 12 is manageable. Let's sure that my slides are still going here. The light looks like it's locked up. And, so let's get to this first idea of location. So let me ask that question. How many people chose the weather today? Just out of curiosity. What did that represent? Anybody want to jump in what that represented to you? The opportunity to get outside? Yeah, it didn't have to be necessarily that you went somewhere warmer, right? That's a great answer. And no, it really is. And it's a anybody else? Did anybody do something different on location? How about the front door? Anybody just like want to stay home, never leave their house? Yeah. That works well too. So look, you guys did a great job because this really gets to this first question. And this is a big one when it comes to retirement. This is like the hardest question to answer, but it is the most definitive. And is it, should I stay or should I go, right? Not to, I won't start singing, 80s songs. But we found that 75% of people, of retirees, and this is successful retirees, stayed where they were. 25%, we can do this math, moved. Now, here's the good news. Everyone was happy, for the most part. People who stayed, 86% of them were satisfied with their decision, 14% weren't satisfied. The biggest kind of takeaway in that scenario was that their kids moved away after they made this decision, right? And now they had to go follow their grandkids, so they used that as an opportunity to go to Puerto Rico. This was interesting because this number's actually gone up a lot over time. 96% of people who were happy that they moved. Now, we had 4% who weren't satisfied. We had a great example, and I'll probably reference this a little bit later, but it was actually a couple. At this point, they were 86 when we interviewed them. And they lived in LaGrange, Illinois, and had moved to Carmel by the Sea. You guys know where that is? I mean, to move from LaGrange, Illinois to Carmel by the Sea sounds like you must have won the lottery and something went perfect. I mean, that place is gorgeous. It's California, so but that's a different issue. This was a few years ago, but it is a gorgeous spot. And they chose to move back. And the question about why they moved back came down to kind of those critical things. Their kids weren't there. Their family wasn't there. You could only take so many walks on the beach a day before you said you wanted to go back and be surrounded by those things that were important to you. So, this is that big conversation or question. I mean, God, do you guys go through this a lot when you're talking to folks from a retirement planning standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. There's almost always a move within a couple of years before or a couple of years after retirement, and thinking, where are the kids? Where do we want to live? Where is our recreation? All this whole list of questions comes up about, should we stay? Should we move and stay? Should we stay in what we have? Or what do we need to do to get our current house to the spot where we can stay for a long time in it? All these things swirl around.
Yeah, no, my wife is actually an occupational therapist at the VA, so she has a lot of conversations about age-proofing your house early on. People who are veterans can get some veteran benefits. I mean, that's very specific to her. but making sure that you've got a place that you can stick around with. And she asks questions that I don't think of, right? Because if we ever move to another house, her first thing is, let's make sure there's a guest bedroom on the first floor. I told you my parents are in their 70s, right? We want to make sure that they can get in and out if they want to, and her parents are going to be the same way. So those are important questions to kind of have and to deal with and to answer while we can, because the last thing you want to do is a renovation when you're home all day, right? Maybe it is something that's better to do when you're working. So what were the top reasons that people stayed? Again, number one was that they wanted to stay near their friends and family. They were familiar with where things were. They knew how to get to Walgreens. They knew how to get to the dentist. It was financially attractive. This is my in-laws, right? The mortgage is paid off, right? So they don't want to ever go through that all over again. And then access to healthcare. My folks are spending time in Florida, but their biggest reason to come up north again isn't to see their grandchildren, who they promise they like. It's to they want to go see their doctors and golf with their golf club, right? People who moved, why did they move? Again, big one. I think in Iowa, this number would probably be quite a bit higher, but 44% was better climate. They wanted to be closer to friends and family. Wanted to be somewhere that was retiree friendly, or that their current spot was just too expensive, and it was an opportunity for them to downsize and be able to save some money. So,
Hey, Chris,
yeah,
one thing, I just talked to a younger client today, a client in their late 30s, and they're already making plans to move both of their mothers to Des Moines someday. So it's not just the generation that's retiring that has these plans in mind. It's the younger generation too. How can we care for mom and dad in their age?
they must be good salespeople, depending on where they're moving from. I live in Des Moines. Yeah, you buy them a house and they'll move, right? But that is kind of this tension point. So again, I think this one's pretty straightforward, but we do just need to make sure that we're going to be balancing out those two things for retirees, right? Are we close enough to family and friends? Are we in a place that we want to be warm enough, that we can be happy enough, that we can go outside and we can go for walks? So just an important conversation to have, one that most people think about as the big thing when they come to retirement. But that is what we want to talk about when we want to talk about location. So these next two are the areas that we find people don't have as many conversations about, because it's just stuff we'll get to when we have time. And it's that vocation, it's that calling here in general. This is not my kids. My kids are way cuter. Not biased. So if anything, I'm over caffeinated today if I talk too fast. And that's because I had a 7-month-old in my arms the entire night last night. She's got her first 2 little teeth, but the top 2 are coming through, and it's just drool all day, every day. But in the last week or so, she's learned how to crawl. She's not very good at it, if you guys have ever seen a 7-month-old try to crawl. But she gets so flipping happy to make like 3 feet, crawling on her belly. Like, thank God the people online, hopefully it's not videotape, crawling on her belly like this. And she gets this, like, it's not toothless now, but pretty much just insane, toothless, giggling grin to go like that far. And it's this inherent sense of accomplishment that we all have, right? So, we could say if you've ever seen kids take their first steps or their first couple of steps, this is what it's all about. And the reality is it doesn't stop when you're 6 months or 6 years old. Accomplishment is important. To be able to work towards something is important. Again, to bring it home to my own father, the biggest thing 6 months after he retired is he didn't have anything he was working towards anymore. And that just felt like the days got long, things got slow. AARP did a study that basically asked the same question about accomplishment in baby boomers. And they found that people who had and were working towards goals, they had some sort of vocation, not only were younger from an intellectual age standpoint, but had a higher satisfaction in retirement. Look, we're not talking about everybody acting like babies, but it is this idea of dying with your boots on, right? To use was that John Wayne? Was that John Wayne? We'll say it was John Wayne, Winterset, Iowa, right? But this is kind of the mentality of the generation that we're in now, is that we're continuing to find ways to contribute. So on the second page of here, you're going to see basically this question here saying, what will my retirement look like? And we use the term creating your play check. And we call it a play check because a large percentage of people after retirement still find an opportunity to be able to make money. But it doesn't have to, right? This could be something like my mother-in-law still makes money, which then goes directly to Prairie Meadows, teaching online, right? But she says we get great perks, and she gave us a toaster oven, so it's all okay. But that's fun, right? That's her play money, that's her play check. Now, I went through this same questionnaire with my wife last night, after the kids went to bed, and I started to ask her these, and she got very real with me very quickly about what she doesn't like about her job. But these are the 5 questions that we're going to ask: is what do you like the most about what you do? So I told you she's an occupational therapist. What does she like the most? Well, hopefully anybody in healthcare helping people, right, was number 1. And then number 2 was something I realized, but she mostly complains about it. So I was surprised that she said it was, she works with students. She runs the student program at the VA, and she really, really enjoys that education function. Okay, well, that was interesting. What do you like least about your work? That took a while, but we got through that. What is it costing you from a health time balance? What's an ideal working scenario? And then what would you be most passionate about, and what could you do forever? So as we had this conversation, she told me that what she liked the most, and I really should have known this, but what she likes, before we had 2 girls, is Disney World, is what she likes the most. So she told me that there's this whole cottage industry of planning Disney trips. Have you guys heard of this before? Yeah, so that's what she said. If she could do anything in the world, it would be to help teach people about how to get the most bang for their buck at Disney World, and to be able to help plan their trips, whether it's to make a lot of money or not, but to get reservations at the right restaurants, to spend a lot of time to figure out the right rides and the genies and the ride shares and all that. That was what she wanted to do. And if she were ever to step away from being the VA, that this is where she would find things that were fun. I don't know if we've all gone through that exercise. A lot of times say, maybe I want to teach when I'm done working. Maybe, but if you can go through this, we're not going to do it right now, but with yourself or with your spouse, afterwards, are there things that would engage you? And it doesn't have to be working, but that we can find some areas that we can be passionate about. So that's where it gets to this idea of what is it going to look like? How can we find both purpose and we can find passion? And typically it's going to fall into one of 3 categories for people. The first is the opportunity or ability to pursue more hobbies, right? This is the one that everybody aspires to. I'm going to learn how to paint. I'm going to finally learn how to play guitar and get all the girls, right? We're going to spend more time doing arts, and we're going to do crafts. 77% of people said that was one of the things that they looked forward to the most in retirement. Plan to pursue sports? Are we going to go golfing? Are we going to play pickleball? I'm told the fastest growing sport in America, right? 49, 51, 50% of people found that sports. And then the third one that came up the least often was to do more volunteer work. It was 41% of people said they wanted to volunteer more, and 59% of people said that they didn't have any desire to do that. What's interesting is if we found where satisfaction was for retirees, where they got the most satisfaction in retirement, it was actually the exact opposite of where people plan to spend the most time in retirement. So when we sit, basically looking at the 2 categories between volunteering and finding more hobbies and interests, 86% of people who found the opportunity to volunteer, so that was what gave them passion, that's what gave them motivation, that's what gave them interest, whereas only 44% of people attributed that to their hobbies or to their sports. The reason that this is important is that's a good question to ask while we're still in the workforce. Are there areas that we can contribute? Are there things that we can volunteer for now when we're engaged with people on a regular basis? Can we set forth those organizations, maybe it's church, that are important to us, and find ways that we can incorporate and then invest some of our time? Because some of the best output comes from those areas. Nothing wrong with making a quilt, right? But it doesn't have that same social interaction. And that's what people miss the most when we talk to pre-retirees and retirees once they kind of enter into that, is that regular interaction with the people, either in their workplace, on the way to work, getting a cup of coffee, the same guy at Hy-Vee every day at 7 o'clock. You're going to run out of things to talk about, right? And that volunteering makes a big, big difference. This is kind of interesting. Doctors, you'll talk about vitamins a lot. My daughter now she doesn't know who Fred Flintstone is, but she knows he makes a really sweet candy. You guys know kind of the Flintstone vitamin treats. Doctors will say that in many ways, of all the vitamins that are out there, the fish oil, the vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C, that the most important might be vitamin C, right? And the reason for that is not only is it a vitamin that's vital in kind of creating our the amino acids and all the building blocks in our body, it's also an antioxidant. Vitamin C helps to reduce cancer. It helps to keep people healthier for longer. So Mitch Anthony, who helped us kind of develop this program, the New Retirementality, really kind of looked at these vitamins, these vitamin Cs, as the parallels, the ones that came up the most commonly among pre-retirees and retirees in order to keep them successful. And if you see this, you're going to start to see in your workbook now on page 5 where those vitamins are, those vitamins of successful aging. So we didn't give you the 5 answers right on the top, but if you can follow along, they end up being the bullet points right below. But these are the 5 areas that really led to that energy. If you ever think about kind of that 70, 80, 85-year-old who's just so full of life and so energetic, and you just wish you could find a way to bottle that up, these are the characteristics that we found that were the most common in there. This was that fountain of youth. So the first was connectivity. And again, this is probably of any of them the most important. You'll see we asked some questions in there about, making sure that we can find the opportunity to find people we love, people we enjoy, people who appreciate our presence. One woman who we interviewed was a 93-year-old artist in Canada, and she just was one of those people that really embodied the energy that we talk about. And we asked her, what kept her so young and energetic, and she kind of brought it down to 2 things. She said the first was at least once a week she'd find another artist, because she thought artists had some sort of, a very artistic way to say it, portal to the soul, but had the ability to look at the world in a different way and to engage in those conversations is what brought her energy and brought her joy. And then the second was 2 ounces of Canadian whiskey each night. That was her answer in order to be successful. But that connectivity really is so important. And like I said at the beginning, that example of the family that lived in LaGrange, Illinois, and moved to Carmel by the Sea and came back, this is what they felt was missing. This is what they didn't have. The second is challenge. Oftentimes this is going to come from a physical challenge standpoint, but finding ways that we can physically challenge ourselves. It could be a Peloton, it could be a treadmill, it could be that pickleball game, it could just be walking around the neighborhood. But what are those things that we enjoy? What are those things that we can look forward to? And what are those things that we can age up on? Curiosity. Again, there's a lot of ways that we look at this. Technology has helped a lot from a curiosity standpoint. But we interviewed a lawyer, not my dad, but it was a very similar story. And he had been retired for 6 months, and he felt that just after 6 months, he was less sharp. He was starting less articulate than he had been before since he retired, that he wasn't exercising that same analytical part of his brain. So, I don't know if it's Candy Crush, right? But it could be the New York Times crossword puzzle. It could be Sudoku. It could be, Duolingo, and using it as an opportunity to learn Spanish or to learn another language. But finding that ability to continually be curious really has been proven to be one of those ways to keep ourselves sharp and keep ourselves young for longer. Creativity, again, this gets down to the hobbies. It gets down to artwork. What are those things that inspire you? What are those things that you can be passionate about? And when you get these extra hours in a day, how can we engage in this? And of course, charity. And again, charity could be that we are in a situation where we can give back financially. From a financial planning standpoint, I'm sure you could talk about cruts and gruts and grats and all of these trusts and abilities to be able to give money to the next generation. But if we're not in a situation where we can do those things financially, what can we do from volunteering our time, giving to the next generation? But that this charity is really one of those things that we consistently found in our research, be it through church, be it through organizations that we care about, really paid off a lot. So as we kind of answer those critical 3 questions, that information around vocation, this comes down to how many of these 5 boxes can we check in those conversations? Did you want to answer me? No, and I think that's perfect. And that's the conversations that we want to, have, right? Because as a financial planner, as somebody who's going to help you along those guideposts, the more of that's important is the more ways that we can find to be able to incorporate all of that in general.
Yeah, I just want to
Yeah,
add and
please.
summarize for the people online. What I heard Kurt mentioned, an example where he and his wife volunteer, and it looks a little different than what we're used to. And right, we have 3 things that we can always give. We can give our time, we can give our talents, and we can give our treasures financially. And so I've always found the most potent way is to marry those three together and step forward and volunteer in some sort of unique and creative way through your time and your talent. When you put those together, those are a powerful force.
And we also talk about, when you start to talk about the next generation, either with yourself or who you want to care about, is that it's not just about passing on your valuables. Sometimes it's about passing on your values, right? And I think that's pretty important these days, certainly as well. So thank you. That's great. All right, let's get the last one, which is vacation, which is the fun stuff, is how are we going to engage and how are we going to find our time? Again, location is one of those things that's set, and then we've got to balance out these other two of vocation and vacation. Are we spending too much time doing that? Are we spending not enough time on ourselves and enjoying ourselves? What we found was that balance was important. You can see 52% of retirees thought that it was an important thing in order to balance those contributions between enjoying themselves and making those contributions. Travel was a really big deal. This was probably the most common thing that came up for people, was what their goal was in retirement. 83% of people said that they wanted to spend more time traveling. 2/3 of it had already come up with a list of all the places that they wanted to visit. If you haven't done it, it's a fun activity and a fun exercise to figure out that me and my wife want to go to none of the same places. She just wants to go to Epcot. She thinks that's traveling the world. One thing that is worth knowing is that, once people got to retirement, almost 20% of folks found that they weren't healthy enough to do all the things that they had wanted to do beforehand. So again, from a planning perspective, having that conversation, using Guy, using Kurt, using the folks in this room is kind of a sounding board for these conversations. Caleb, we talk about, you got your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. Is there a way when we talk about budgeting that we can make sure that we can spend the right amount of time doing the right activities early on in our retirement so that we can truly enjoy them, and that we don't, hit a situation where we can't hike Machu Picchu at 85 years old, right? Which, again, sounds fun, but it's certainly one of those things that we want to prioritize early on. Again, 27% of people, we said this as with sports before, 27% of people find sports so important that they actually consider that their vacation. These are probably the old guys at the golf course that mean that I can never get on, right? Because they're going to golf 4 or 5 times a week. It's not everybody, but it certainly is some people that are there. Now, that leads to a really interesting kind of conversation. And again, a great conversation point with your partner to start to prioritize what you actually want to do in retirement. So if you look at page 7, you'll see a very similar chart to what is on here. And it's looking at the week in 27 quadrants: morning, afternoon, and evening, Monday through Sunday. And to challenge yourself to fill out all 27 things that you would do in retirement if you're not working. What are you going to do Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday night, Friday afternoon? How are we going to, you probably shouldn't write down golf 27 times, right? You're going to run out of things to do in that environment. And you actually find that this starts to get kind of challenging to figure out what a perfect week is. One big question we used to ask in this years ago was, it's 10 o'clock on Thursday. You've been retired for 3 years. What are you doing? You start to think about what that regular day might look like here in general. And on the other side, again, we talk a lot in financial planning about allocating our assets, right? You guys have heard how much are we putting in stocks? How much are we putting in bonds? How much are we putting in, other investments that are out there? How are we ideally allocating our time? And what percentage of time in an ideal environment are we spending with family? What percentage of time are we spending, sleeping or traveling or on health and fitness? And going through that exercise of trying to allocate those hours to fit the 168 can help prioritize what's important for us in general. Now, the next piece that we have gets to this, and again, we'll go through these here. We've talked a little bit about what it's going to be like, because that's the fun stuff, right? That's the stuff we don't talk enough about in this industry, is how are we going to enjoy ourselves? The next is when is it going to happen? And actually, I talked to Mitch in June. We had this very conversation specifically around retirement, and he made a joke that stuck with me. He said, for some reason, us in the financial planning service industry think there's only 3 days that matter in our entire lives: the day our kid goes to college, the day we retire, and the day that we die. And that those, from a goal perspective, you talk about traditional goal planning, and I'm not saying people in this office, but traditional goals are all targeted towards those 3 things, right? We have a 529, we have an IRA, and what's our trust look like? The reality is there are a lot more dates than that. So we've created a list of those. Now, from a financial perspective, it starts to get overwhelming. 55 is when you can start taking money from your SEP. You get 59, you can take it from a KEO. At 62, you can get Social Security. 66, Social Security benefits if you were born before 1960, 67 after 1960, 93 if you were born in the 80s. 70 is when you have to take your IRA contributions. This is out of date already because of the Retire Secure Act, right? That's 72 now. Again, there's a lot of these numbers that matter, but those aren't the only ones. I mean, Mitch would say you can come up with 70 or 80 numbers that are really important in retirement when it comes to being able to protect your wealth. So we've got something that we'll pass out at the end. If you don't have it already, it's called a retirement lifeline.
Chris, it's actually in the middle of your tables. I put it
Perfect.
there.
Thank you. Yes, it's this one here, which is a retirement lifeline. And this retirement lifeline lists off a bunch of the challenges and a bunch of the specific dates that we may have, the ones that we don't always talk about. So when does, my 7-month-old daughter spend $100,000 on her wedding? Because I'm sure that's what it's going to be like if her mom continues to treat her like a Disney princess, right? Or at least that's what she's going to ask for. How about when we finish off our house payments? When's our mortgage paid off? When do we, finish off our car payments? When do we want to take that big trip to our safari? We've tried to list some of those off for you. On the bottom, you'll see those kind of more traditional financial dates. But what we want to identify is those other days, those days that matter, the days that make this all worth doing. The days about a wedding, the days about retirement, the days about college. To be able to find some of those other, and frankly, you can see on the title there, to give the opportunity to bring a little bit of order out of chaos. And then ideally have those conversations with the people around money who can help us make sure that we can identify those goals. Because the more that we know, the better off we're going to be able to do to be able to fund it. And then the last, of course, is how am I going to get there? And that's where these conversations come up a lot. Now, you may come up, have you guys done any budgeting with the advisors here in this office or come up with kind of a financial planning? I see a lot of folks that are nodding here in general. It's a bunch of input, right? You pour a bunch of numbers out there and then they say, hey, you need $2.6 million and we'll give you this amount of money and whatever that is. And that is a very, very valuable tool. It is also data heavy and data rich. So one other way that we have looked at this, do you guys recognize what this is? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, exactly. Right, and Maslow was really different from some of the other psychiatrists at the time because other psychiatrists basically studied crazy people, right? They went to insane institutions to be able to say, here's how people think. Maslow interviewed people like Eleanor Roosevelt and Albert Einstein to be able to figure out how did they prioritize and how were they so successful. And again, this is in this guide, this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But the old psychological way to look at it is that you're going to make sure that you've got physical survival, safety and security, self-esteem, self-actualization, that this is the priority that we make sure that we hit our needs. We've done the same activity to try to make this easier within financial business, is that we've got survival money. This is the money that you just got to have to be able to make sure we can keep the lights on in medicine. Your what if money, what if something bad happens? What if you got to move your moms back to Iowa, right? What's the freedom money? What's financial freedom look like for you where you can start to have fun? How can you leave that legacy behind? And then kind of what's that aspirational dream money? So you'll see in your guides a version of that. I know it's very small and maybe if you're online, you can read it, but if you're not, but run through an example that we did for a client. Let's see if I can find where it is. It's a little further in this deck. Thank you, the team. So this was a couple in Illinois. I started in Illinois. That's where a lot of our stuff was. But we went through this with them and basically started to run through these numbers. So the first was survival money. How much do they need just to make their mortgage? Oh, please go ahead. Yeah. How much do they need to make their mortgage payment? Came down to about $3,000 a month. Then they had their what if money. And that was the money that they just knew that they would be comfortable with. So in this case, it was about $24,000, $25,000 a year. They wrote on the side, if Betty's mother's roof falls in, right? Then their freedom money or their fun money were things like their club membership to be able to pay their dues. I think they wrote Spanish lessons and things that are a little aspirational here as well. Their gift money, the things that were important to them, it was church, it was the American Heart Association, and then their dream was to be able to have a timeshare in Aspen. And that came out to $1,000 a month. For this couple, the number came out to be about $9,300. You guys can read that number there at the bottom. It's a little blurry. So $111,000 a year. That's how they backed in to the number that they needed in order to be happy and to be comfortable in retirement. Now, one of the authors of this program, Brett Van Bortle, did this same thing with his dad, and his dad's dream was to take an RV around the country, right? And he knew how much it was going to cost to have an RV, and he knew how much he had for Social Security. And he knew he had enough money with his Social Security checks to pay for the RV payment. But he didn't think about gas. And he didn't think about parking it. And he also didn't know that Brett's brother was going to move back into the house because he had just gone through a nasty divorce, right? So they went through this before he had retired. He worked a couple more years. They were still able to fulfill their dream. But it's a different way to kind of go through that process and identify where your money is. Look, at the end of the day, we've seen these stories before, but we want to make sure that your money works as hard for you as you work for your money, right? You know, there are two things that we can have. There are two things that we can control. It's how much risk do we take and how long are we going to keep our money invested? And you've probably seen some of these numbers before, but the longer you have invested, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the huge difference this can make for us to be able to reach our goals. That's what these guys do, right? Is to be sure that we can find and then we can line up our investments and make sure that we can, reach the goals that we have here together. That was our goal today, was hopefully to just give you a little bit of tools and a little bit of thought process to answer those three big questions, right? Where are we going to do it? How are we going to enjoy ourselves? And how are we going to have some fun? Obviously, funding it is part of it, but being able to envision it and create that envision is very important as well. So if you look in your guide, you'll see before that page 15, a number of other spreadsheets. Some of these you may have already gone through. Some of them, they may be helpful. They may resonate with you to be able to identify how much money we want, how much money we need, and then to have those conversations about the things that are important. So your time is important. I want to thank you for letting us share with you today. I'm going to stick around if there's any other questions, but Guy, did you want to add anything else?
You bet. Thank you, Chris. We're going to have some additional materials. Yeah. We're going to have some additional materials over on the piano here to take on your way out if you want to. A lot of homework. Fill it out. Start talking and dreaming. In fact, listening to this, I'm taking notes, and I go back to something that Kurt's been saying for years. What do we do here at Compass? We match dollars with dreams. And this sounded like a lot of dreaming, didn't it? And until it sounds corny, but until you've actually sat across the table from somebody and watched the dream be fulfilled in real time, then it takes on a real new meaning. I asked each of the advisors to fill out a little index cards of the things that they have learned watching so many people go through retirement. And I will read. So Justin is starting. Retirement is a huge shift, not just in daily schedules and routines, but also emotional. So much of our self-worth is tied to our job and career. Retirement brings a whole new version of ourselves. Life in retirement is often just as busy as the working years, but the time is filled with things you want to do instead of things you have to do. And it's important to have something to retire to. We know what you're retiring from, but what are you retiring to? That's Justin's. Caleb likes to keep it short and sweet. It's never going to go 100% according to plan. There will be surprises. Some of them will be good surprises, and some of them will be not so good. And this goes to an old quote from Winston Churchill. Plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable. It's about staying flexible. It's about going back to the pencil and paper again when something changes in your situation. Thanks, Caleb. Michelle, in my experience, the vocation that struggles with the transition of retirement the most are educators. Give yourself 1 to 2 years to get comfortable with your new life. Don't panic that it feels unusual at the beginning. And retirement is an outdated term. Maybe restructure, retreat, renew, reevaluate, all those things. Steve says, regardless of how well prepared they are, most people enter into retirement very cautiously from a financial perspective. It takes a year or more for most retirees to feel confident that their planning actually will work. And what I know about retirement, nothing. I don't know anything about retirement. Kurt's just starting to learn. But what I've seen in my work here is the most successful retirees are the people whose personal lives slowly crowd out their professional life. And the transition is so smooth and natural that they don't even know it until one day they look up and say, well, I'm retired now because I'm doing all the things that I want to do and none of the things that I have to do. Also, what I've seen is most retirees do not struggle with the day-to-day or the month-to-month expenses. They usually have a pretty good idea about what their lifestyle holds. It's the big expenses. It's the big remodel. It's a new roof. It's the kitchen, remodel. It's the new bathroom. It's the new car. Because by the way, most retirees aren't buying, sorry, Steve, a $4,000 Camry. I love you. I'm right along with you, but most retirees aren't doing that. They're buying a $35,000 vehicle or more, What do new trucks cost? Greg, come on. 70? Yeah, new truck. Whew. Okay, so those are the things that we have seen and just little tidbits of wisdom. So first of all, thank you for coming today. Thank you for being clients here. Thank you for your business. It is our life and breath. We are here to serve you. The way that I would say, when we look at our data here, almost all of our new clients come from existing clients. So your referrals, your word of mouth really matters to our business. And thank you for your trust in passing our names along. That's how we grow. What a day. You get to go home and dream about retirement. You might be in it. You might be looking forward to it. It might even be old news to you, but it's still exciting, isn't it?
Well, and I will say those two pieces that you had over there, right? The one has questions and resources specifically around location, vocation, and vacation. So if you want to continue this conversation outside of here, just or find those additional resources, there are those big glossy cards. And then the other is the vitamin C quiz, which is just to help identify which of those vitamin C's for you and for your spouse or your partner are the most important. And then you've got a couple books here too. I think we can touch on that if you wanted to.
There is, this is the book, The New Retirementality. I have 2 copies and we're certainly give those away. Could we have a list on the way out of people that want to sign up to get one? We'll send you one. So again, what we'd rather do, instead of spending our money trying to get someone that doesn't know Compass in the door, we'd rather invite our clients in and feed them and hang out with them, because that's how our business works. So thank you for your business. Thanks for coming today, and be careful. It's March in Iowa. Have a great day.